Hello, it's Dr. Tirrell. I just wanted to give you some information about how the course is responding to the recent closures due to extreme weather. And then also talk about upcoming assignments because our calendar has changed a little bit. Not radical, well, it's been compressed quite a bit, but the same materials are still largely there. But we do want to look at upcoming assignments since this is an entirely online course. We all need to be current about what's expected of the in terms of turning things in as we move forward. So let me just briefly share my screen with you here, and we'll take a look at how things have changed. Okay, so let me just switch over here. This is the syllabus, and you can see that new areas here are marked in red. This thing at the beginning, the severe weather closure statement, this is information that's standardized. It's from essentially the university system, right, the entire UNC system, which taps into state law as well. The overarching message here is that, we missed 4 weeks of class, we're in our 4th week, which is equivalent to about 600 instructional minutes. That's handled differently for completely online classes, but it's a 3-credit-hour course, so that essentially breaks down to 150 contact minutes per week. That's where that 600 comes from. As it points out, to make up for this, the school is implementing some different things. Now, a lot of them pertain to in face-to-face classes, as I'm sure you're aware, right? Things like changing the meeting times to extend the period, canceling certain days like fall break and reading day, right? And those things, some of them don't apply or apply to us differently. So we do have to make up those minutes. That is, as I say, it's essentially state law. I mean, think of it as as a student, by paying tuition, you're guaranteed a certain number of minutes. So we are obliged to make those up. The way we're going to be doing that is through things like work that are going to be out of class. I mean, that's all of ours is out of class. Assignments, extended video content, right? I mean, we already use video for discussion. We're going to be essentially extending those because the semester is compressed. So that will get us to those minutes. Another thing we're going to do is have individual video conferences near the end of the semester. And we'll talk about this in just a bit, but you'll have an individual conference with me, and that will also count toward that minute total. So that's the gist of what this says here. You can look through the syllabus, and the changes are marked in red. And you can see most of the core things, of course, are the same. There are really 2 main policy changes. One of them is that our policy on late work has changed, right? As it says, because of significant time compression that has resulted from extreme weather closures, the instructor will make every reasonable attempt to accommodate late work. So previously you really didn't accept late work, but now, since we're all students, faculty, staff, everybody will be under a significant time crunch. You're gonna have to make some priority decisions about, I need to do one thing now and another thing later. So I'm happy to work with you in terms of late work or due dates, let's say. The thing to do is just let me know in advance and keep me in the loop, right? I mean, you don't want to come back weeks later and say, oh, I forgot to do this and I want to do it now. That's not late work. But I'm more than happy to work with you on due dates. As it says, every reasonable attempt I can make to help you out there, I will. So that's the one of the 2 main changes. The other main change down here, you can see we're still doing the same project, same point total. The change is that this point total is going to be mediated by each student's self-assessment, as it says, and then it points us to this larger section here. And basically what this says is that although you're going to keep receiving feedback and numerical scores from me, you're also going to be preparing a brief self-assessment near the end of the semester. And we'll look at what that specifically is here in just a second. but you're going to share that assessment with me in this individual online discussion that I previously mentioned. So near the end of the semester, you're going to write up a brief self-assessment that articulates what final grade you believe you've earned and why, based on class achievement. And then we're going to use that to have a discussion about what's a fair final grade. We'll look at the parameters of that in a bit here, but the gist of it is, since we only have so much time remaining, what I'd like for us to do is focus on learning the material and practicing the concepts rather than getting overly hung up on points. Because, with the time compression, it's likely that you're just not going to be able to spend as much time as you'd like to on some of our assignments, or that, certain small ones will just, you'll have to cut them completely. So this will allow me to get a sense of your achievement in the class, beyond what the points tell me. And this isn't just coming from the ether, as it points out here. This draws upon what's sometimes called ungraded assessment, and there are some informational links there if you'd like to read about it. But it just puts more trust in you to be an arbiter of your own achievement, right? To let me know, because I simply can't monitor everyone closely under the circumstances. So it puts trust in you to take agency with assessment, right? Now there is reciprocity, as we'll look at here in a bit. It's not like you're going to be assigning your own final grade, but you will have a say in that beyond just what is tabulated in the points. Okay, so that's the main things to be aware of there. Those two changes, right? The self-assessment near the end, and we'll look at that in just a second. And then also late work. Due dates now are negotiable. We just need to talk about it ahead of time if you can. And then, of course, we'll see, making up time. It's not like we can just compress the remainder of the semester into the remaining weeks. We also have to demonstrate that we've done extra material to make up those lost minutes. I know that seems draconian in some ways, but it's all of us. We all have to deal with it. It's not just compressing the calendar; it's actually making up those minutes. That means we have to do some extra stuff. I've tried to make it as less onerous as it can be, primarily by doing things like just extending our regular video discussions X number of minutes each time, and then that'll hit our minute total basically. So let's look at the self-assessment. It is already available here under assignments, just so you can get a look at it. Here's the instructions, and that'll sort of clarify what this is. As I mentioned, you're going to be writing a short statement that clarifies what final course grade you believe you've earned based upon class achievement. So that means it's not based on hardship, on saying, well, I had to deal with this and that. I mean, that's relevant, but it's not primary, because everyone has to deal. I mean, the hurricane wiped everything out, so everyone has to deal with a whole lot. The question is, what did you do in terms of our course material that isn't showing up in the points, right? So, you were engaged, but you really couldn't revise this project the way you'd like to because you were dealing with a lot of other, pressing school matters. So, here are the things you wanted to do, but just time crunch disallowed it. I mean, that's what I'm looking for, is what have you done beyond the points? What's the whole story, I suppose, that that I only have part of. It's about 600 words, which is about 2 pages. But really what we want here is I want you to write something in advance so that when we have our individual online conference, we have something to guide that, right? It's if you come in without something written, it can be very unfocused. Like, well, my point said I have a 0, but I want an A, and here's why. I mean, it's not super helpful. Each student will, as I mentioned, share that with me, and we'll have a discussion, and we'll use that written statement in order to focus, to give us a framework for that discussion. Now, as it points out here, you can kind of think of this as just a big cumulative extra credit opportunity. It's not in the points. I mean, you noticed in the syllabus there, the point total is the same. I mean, all this is the same. So you might think of it as a big extra credit opportunity, because as it says, it's capable of adding a full letter grade, so 25 points because we have 250, so that's 10%, right? Which is equivalent to a full letter grade. What that means is there are boundaries on this. Someone couldn't, for example, not do the remainder of the work and then end up with a very low point total and say, well, I want an A because I did these things. There's a cap on this, right? But it's a pretty big cap. It's a full letter grade. So if things happen to slip, a couple of assignments you just can't do because of other time pressures, or attention you wanted to pay to one main project, but it just couldn't happen because of time issues. This is a sort of catch-all for that, right? This allows us to make up for this weird situation on the back end with this, large extra credit opportunity. So that's the gist of what this is. We'll be doing this later at the end of the semester. But if you have any questions about it, you can, of course, contact me. And as I said, the impulse here, what's driving this? It's not just, it's a hurricane, so everyone gets a good grade. It's we only have so much time remaining and we're going to be under the gun. So, I want to focus on learning, and getting overly hung up on points is just going to hinder that at this juncture. All right, so that's that. The calendar here, you'll notice it's been updated. We've got the the whole month that we've been out there. We're probably going to have to kind of get a little bit of a wind up because it's been a month, and so we've probably sort of forgotten what we've been doing and that kind of stuff. Perfectly understandable. You'll remember we're in the local mapping project right now. We've got the two main projects and then a portfolio at the end, as well as reading responses. So if you look at the calendar, we're still doing the same stuff. What's happened is some things have been compressed, kind of compiled into fewer meetings. So what that means, as I said, is that our video discussions, the ones that take place on Wednesdays at 3, they're going to be each one will be a little bit longer, presumably, because it's just covering more stuff. We have to cover more stuff. So we are going to be getting extra minutes that way. And that combined with the individual conferences should make up our total. So that's the gist of sort of how things are going to go here. You can take a look at the calendar here. Same stuff. We're going to finish up with the local mapping project, then turn to our podcast project, and then wrap up with our reflective online portfolio. Those are the main sort of things we're doing. And along the way, we'll, of course, be doing responses based on some things we'll read and some things we'll listen to, like podcasts and this and that. Same stuff, it's just we're handling it in some slightly different ways. All right, so let's talk about upcoming assignments, just because our first week back here, the 9th, the 8th week, there is a slight change in that we've added the venue analysis. This other stuff is the same, right? We've still got Listen to This American Life's mapping episode, which is about an hour. If you listen to it here, it's free. You can just play on your computer. If you want to download it, they actually charge you a little bit. I think it's like 99 cents, just because they have such a huge back catalog. Just the hosting for it has got to be outrageous. But do, if you haven't, listen to that and then do response number 2. And you can kind of remember how we handle these. Gives you the instructions here. Go ahead and listen to that episode and then do the prompts. For this one, it asks you to briefly summarize the episode, and then it has 5 more questions here that ask you to think about possible topics for your local mapping project, aligning with the 5 different senses, right? Because that's what this topic actually, this podcast actually does. It talks about mapping, but it's broken into 5 segments based on the 5 senses and talks about how to map with each one. So I'm asking you to think about, how could you map an aspect of your local environment with sight, and then with hearing, and then with smell. And once you listen to the episode, it makes more sense because that's what they're doing. And right now we're still in sort of an early stage. So if you want to think about, what topic you want to pursue, you still can do that, right? Nothing's locked in. And you might even start thinking about topics. You don't have to do this, but you might think about topics that are related to what we just went through, right? I mean, think about how important mapping was to this event we all just shared, right? Things like the weather maps leading up to it. Man, the road maps. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I spent a week in Augusta and then another week in Chicago, and that NC dot, those travel maps. Yeah, of course I've got it pulled up already. Those travel maps they have here were, I mean, my lifeline. You know, trying to figure out how to drive back into the town, you know, because the road closures kept closing down. Right, it's the Tim's one. Now everything's pretty much okay. But, you know, when you saw this before, it was bonkers. And, you know, maybe like you folks, we kind of like had to drive because I was coming, you know, coming in from 13 hours away, and roads were sometimes good and then sometimes they'd be bad. And then if you got here, it would be all right, but otherwise it would close. I mean, mapping was so super important to this thing we just went through. It actually makes, you know, it makes us think about what are some interesting topics, right? It maybe makes what we're doing newly relevant. And this happens in things like disasters, as we'll talk about. You know, mapping is often used for things like bottom-up, citizen-made rescue maps. So things like in Hurricane Katrina, when they didn't have good top-down information about where people were, what the water levels were, you can actually find old Katrina maps that individual humans made who could occasionally get cell phone reception. And so, you know, individual humans, not agencies, not FEMA, not the state government, made their own maps about here's what the water level is. Here's people who need to be rescued, right? It was very bottom up. So we might want to think about that when we're deciding on topics. A couple of things popped up for me, like this just popped up the second. So, you know, a day or two ago, whatever. What's today? The second, oh, it's today, popped up today. Man, I don't know about you, but every day, it feels like the last few weeks have been about 4 years. I don't know what day of the week it is. Anywho, this popped up for me. It was a tree map of New York City. And there's actually an online map here of basically just about every tree in New York City, every street tree. You can imagine what a task this was, right? So here it is. You kind of zoom in here. You can actually zoom down to the level. It gives you the burrows and that kind of stuff. But you can zoom into the level of the tree and click on a tree. This is a happy little fella. Tells us what it is. Ginkgo biloba. And those, you know, have male and female. And if you ever have male ginkgos, they smell really bad when they're reproducing. That's why they don't plant them on campuses. They only put the females. But notice also it has stuff like ecological benefits. I mean, this is a great map to show us when we're talking about substantive content, which is a feature of what we're doing. I mean, look at how it puts things in dollars and cents, right? Stormwater intercepted and energy conserved and how much air it produces, right? It takes about 20 standard size or medium-sized trees to provide air for one human being, I believe. Fact check that, please. Fact check that. It's coming off the top of my head. But this write-up about this tree map is really kind of neat, and it talks about how it puts things in different terms, right? Dollar values, but then also other ecological benefits. So, you know, mapping's an important, a varied thing. You know, this also popped up just recently about how, you know, North Carolina, among other things, we a few years ago had a state law. It was HB 819 that basically outlawed our ability to monitor coastlines, right? To map the coast. I don't want to reduce this or turn this into a politically partisan thing, but that is true. We had a state law and still do that said we couldn't monitor coasts, and so we couldn't map the coastline to see if it was, you know, changing, if it was eroding, if the sea level was rising, in part. And this isn't the only reason, perhaps, but in part because the changes of property values, right? If the water level is getting a lot closer, then suddenly, as we know, the property value goes down because you're suddenly at huge risk. Insurance also shoots through the moon and that kind of thing. So, this sort of stuff is newly relevant for us. So I encourage you to think about, think about this. You're not locked into a topic yet. So, explore this. That's what this is. It's an opportunity to think about it. So that's response 2. Oh, wait, you know what? I need to save this. Otherwise it keeps nagging me that I haven't finished it, even though I'm the teacher. Thank you, Blackboard. Yeah, so that was response 2. And we also had our field research packet due. That was originally also due on the 11th, the same day. And you'll remember this. At this point, you do want to pretty much, know what you'd like to pursue, because this is asking you to do first-person research. Now, in our situation, that might be a little bit tricky because, places might still be damaged. It might be hard to get into them. However, that may also give us some new topics potentially to cover. So, for example, if you've listened to the This American Life thing yet, they start by talking about this map of things like cracks in the sidewalks. And you might think, well, that's silly. But it actually has to do with insurance and liability and lawsuits. And then it talks about things like pumpkins, right? We're getting into October. And someone mapped all the houses that have jack-o'-lanterns. And it's really interesting because at first it seems frivolous, but then it starts to show things like economic breakdowns in the city, because people who are wealthier are able to do things like that in ways that people who aren't as wealthy can't. It also shows things like, streetlight coverage. I mean, it taps into all these other socio-cultural things that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So yes, there are challenges now to doing this first-person research, but there are also new opportunities. I mean, right now our landscape is so rich. I mean, you'll drive down a main road and everything will look fine, and then there'll be a parking lot full of tents and trucks and debris. It right now is a weird time, so we might take advantage of what we can do, right? Think about it creatively. There are sample packets here from previous students. I'm sure you've looked through this because this is no surprise. We looked at this before. But do remember that that's due. And as I say, think about this creatively. You want to start deciding what you want to cover when you're doing your field research packet. But think about, what new opportunities are there along with those new challenges. Okay, so those were previously due on week 4, so you've probably been sort of prepping for this anyway. The new one here is this venue analysis. We have had to compress the semester a little bit, and that does mean I need folks to do their venue analysis for the 8th week, the week of the 9th there. Now, as I said, due dates have gotten a little more negotiable. So if this just isn't going to happen for you, just let me know ahead of time and we'll work it out. But we do want to, as much as we can, keep going with due dates. Otherwise, it just becomes impossible. You can't just turn everything in at the end of the semester. There's no way for me to get through it. So we have to be reasonable with our sort of expectations about when things come in. But if you just can't get to it, that's all right. But do your best. We haven't looked at the venue analysis yet, so let's go over that really briefly. As it says, what you're doing is, with this project, now that you, at this point, have thought about different ways to map using your senses, you've done some first-person research with that field research packet, the next step is to find an existing website that might be a feasible home for your map. What that means is, for this project, our goal is to do this as if it were for real, right? I mean, because this is real stuff. You could be doing this beyond just the classroom. I mean, as I mentioned, things like Hurricane Katrina, people were doing exactly what we're doing now. So the goal here is to find a venue, find an existing website online where your map would fit. Right? A place you could put your map. So just to give you an example, this is one we've looked at before in our video discussions. It's actually, if you go here to assignments and then local mapping project, here under this description, these example maps. It's this one, crime rate surrounding Wilmington elementary schools. So we've looked at this one before because it's a nice rich map that a student produced. As it says, it's actually for real estate purposes to help people decide where to move or where to buy a house, because it breaks down things like, crime and that kind of thing, right? With stats and images. So if you were the student who produced this, you'd have to think, where might something like this go, right? If you're doing your venue analysis. And there's lots of options here, right? You might say, well, it could go on the Wilmington city page. It could go on our Chamber of Commerce page or something like that. Or you might think this could go on a real estate page, right? So here's an example one, Intracoastal. I rented from them the first year I lived here, like 9 years ago. Now I'm a proud homeowner. Boy, man, I owe someone $250,000 for 30 years. So anywho, this might be a place that you could go. And in fact, if you look at something like this, it does have under resources things like area information, right? And that's kind of what this is. So, they have sort of maps here. This map might be a really useful addition here. So what I'm asking you to do is identify a venue like this and then answer some questions about it. And there's just a few. So provide the website's name. In this case, it would be, Intracoastal Realty. So I'll just coastal. Oh, it's Realty. I always put a vowel in there. And then it's going to ask for the URL. So I just need to copy and paste. And then we've really got 3 questions: purpose, audience, and context, kind of the big 3 of rhetorical analysis. So discuss what this website seeks to accomplish and identify 3 specific features that further this purpose, right? So what is this trying to do? Well, from looking at it, we can tell it's trying to sell and rent properties, right? We can tell that by looking at things like it leads with property search. And even look how it's broken down, right? Luxury properties, waterfront. But then it also has foreclosures and short sales. If you know what a short sale is, it does presume some knowledge, right? So we know it's trying to sell and rent by features like that, right? What's it leading with? What's the first thing? It's not like this is an alphabetical breakdown or anything like that. So what shows us the purpose? Look at how image driven it is as well, right? Starts with a nice picture of the bridge. It has some fairly stock photos here, but then it moves to featured luxury properties, right? So that structure actually tells us something. It could conceivably just start with huge pictures of this, right? These are real ones we've got now. But this is further down the page. And then it has stuff like these embedded videos, our story, right? It's personal contact. So there's all kinds of features that we could identify when we're discussing what's it trying to do and how do those features advance this purpose, right? Then moving on to audience, we want to think about who's the likely audience for this. You look at something, you say, well, this could be for anybody, but it's not really, right? I mean, has anyone else in the class looked at this besides me? Who is this actually for, and what tells us that? And, we can look at things like the imagery that's being used, the fact that it features luxury properties, but not the other ones, right? I mean, I'm not a luxury buyer. I know I said I have, $250,000. That's a normal home nowadays, guys. I live in Pine Valley. So they're foregrounding things like luxury properties. What does that tell us? What do these stock images tell us, right? Who is this actually for? Yeah, 500,000, $1.5 million. Oof, that looks a lot of water, man. I don't know. So think about issues of audience, right? As it says, identify 3 specific traits of this group. So the likely people looking at this, and discussing how website features appeal to each one, and that's referring to each trait, not each user. So that's what I'm asking you to do, is take a look at who's the likely audience of this and what features hook that audience, right? Address that audience and how. And then lastly, context. So identify other websites that are comparable to this one. They serve a similar purpose. They target a similar audience. They address a similar topic, whatever. So in this case, what about other real estate websites, right? Wilmington Realty, Network Real Estate. We might even, I spelled it wrong. Mashing the keypad at this point. We might go to the City of Wilmington page. I mean, that might be an option, right? Because that's kind of similar. It's not exactly doing the same thing, but look, visually, it's not that different. Again, it's just a slightly different angle. Actually looks visually pretty similar, and it's talking about the same thing. Notice it's foregrounding a hashtag here. So we want to look at some of its peers is what we're doing when we're talking about context. At least that's one aspect of context. Context addresses all the background stuff, right? So we're looking at its peer group, and then we're going to identify some specific features that help your chosen venue, so the one you're selecting, suit the context, and some features that help it stand out. Because when we're talking about context, it's like if we look at these different ones, there is some similarity in all of them, right? I mean, look at the visual structure of this. This is how web pages are now. They all start with what's called a hero, just this big image that you can't even see the stuff anymore. That's called a hero. You can see they've all got it. That's just what things do now. In a few years, that'll be different. And a few years ago, it was different. And then you can see, okay, it breaks down into what we might call grid structure. You can see it's working on these standard image sizes. And I bet if we go here, yep, well, not quite the same. It has a mild grid here. This one's kind of doing it, even though it's circular. This is still working in grids. You can see it. Oh, there's a perfect grid. Here, boy, it's textbook grid work. And, this is what these look like, right? So let's point out some, which parks are open? Point out some things that are similar or shared by this genre, right? How does it fit into its context? How does it let you know it's one of these things? But then also, what stands out from it? Because if it just fits in, then what makes it special, right? What's different here? We might look at something like the incorporation of video. Do we see that everywhere? No, we don't, right? So that's one thing that's different. Interesting then that this isn't foregrounded. We could imagine this having video as the first thing, right? That might make it stand out. That's what we want to think about. What makes this fit in with its context, the kind of thing it is, but also what helps it stand out. And there aren't right or wrong answers for this. It's just that I want you to start taking apart pages because we're going to be thinking about these things, designing to match. So we have to analyze. In order to create something to fit this, we have to analyze how it works. And that's exactly what the venue analysis does. It asks you to analyze the website that you've chosen. That's your venue. Okay? So if you have any questions about doing this, feel free to contact me. Everything always feels a little fuzzy in an online class because we don't meet face-to-face. So just always, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll respond to you as soon and as thoroughly as I can. So just be aware that our first week back, that's next week, week 8, October 9th and 10th there. We have those 3 things that we had before. Listen to the mapping episode, do reading response 2, do your research packet, field research packet, and we now have the additional do the venue analysis. It won't take you a whole bunch more time, but you do want to be aware that that's a new thing that previously we had a little bit, it was later in the semester, but now we have to kind of compress things together. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Let me make sure I'm not skipping over anything here. Nah, that's it. Let me just stop that. There we go. Okay, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I know there's a lot of material, but that's the nature of an online course. Everything flows through, text and through these kinds of video discussions. The main things to keep in mind in terms of the changes to the course, are, the two policy things, which are late work now is a lot more negotiable. And then also, we do have at the end of the semester, you'll be writing up a brief self-assessment, and then we'll have an individual video discussion about essentially what grade you feel you've earned and why. And then it's a big extra credit opportunity that will factor into your final grade. So those are the main policy things to be aware of. Do take a look at the calendar just to get a look at how things have changed. It's the same stuff, but things have changed a little bit because we do have to make up some minutes, and then obviously it's a lot. There's a lot of compression there as well. So those are the main things to take a look at. And then coming up, we do have those assignments I just mentioned, including the venue analysis, which is new. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, we'll pick back up with our regular schedule next week. We'll have the stuff due, and then we'll have the corresponding video discussion, and we'll roll from there. Okay, all right, I'm excited to get back to the class. I'm excited to work with the stuff we're working with. The mapping project is, it was always relevant, but now it's super relevant. Mapping in the event we just went through it's a key part of it. And now it gives us a chance to think about that and work with it, do stuff that actually beyond the classroom will be meaningful. All right, I will talk to you folks later. Stay safe.